Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Cooper, and thinking back, I was probably about 28 when the world decided to give me a good, hard shake. You know, one of those moments that splits your life into a before and an after? Well, mine revolved around my mother's 60th birthday, an event I was explicitly told I wasn't welcome at. That is, until she found out what my grandma Eleanor had left me. Have you ever been made to feel like an afterthought, a spare part in your own family, only to have them suddenly see you in a whole new light when they think you have something they want? It's a bitter pill, isn't it? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. And hey, if you've ever felt like you had to fight tooth and nail for a scrap of recognition, or if you've ever been underestimated by the very people who should have been your biggest cheerleaders, go ahead and hit that like button, and if you want to hear more stories about finding your own strength and standing up for yourself, make sure you subscribe. You're definitely in the right place. My story, like so many I suppose, starts in the tender, formative years of childhood. Our home was comfortable. We never wanted for material things, not really. But there was always an undercurrent, a subtle but persistent chill that seemed to follow me around, while sunshine and warmth perpetually bathed my younger sister, Chloe. She was, and probably still is, the golden child. 4 years my junior, she was everything I wasn't: bubbly, effortlessly charming, athletic, and, in my mother's eyes, perfect. I was the quiet one, the bookworm, the one who preferred sketching in a notepad to playing team sports, the one who always seemed to be observing. Mom, her name is Patricia, but she was always Mom in that all-encompassing, slightly terrifying way, made no secret of her preference. It wasn't in grand, dramatic pronouncements, not usually. It was in the little things, the constant drip 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 of unequal treatment that erodes your sense of self over years. Chloe's artwork, no matter how rudimentary, would be praised to the heavens and displayed prominently on the refrigerator. Mine, often more detailed, more thoughtful, would get a cursory, "Oh, that's nice, Nicole," before being set aside on the kitchen counter, eventually migrating to the recycling bin. I remember one school sports day. I'd actually won a race, a little 3-legged novelty event with a classmate. I was so proud, clutching my flimsy blue ribbon. When I got home, bursting to tell Mom, she was on the phone, gushing about Chloe's near win in the egg and spoon race. Oh, she was robbed, absolutely robbed. That little Timmy definitely cheated. My blue ribbon felt suddenly dull, its victory hollow. When I finally managed to show it to her, she just patted my head distractedly. "Good for you, dear. Now, Chloe, tell Aunt Carol all about your race." I learned early on that my achievements were background noise to Chloe's main performance. My father, David, was a more passive figure in this domestic drama. He was a kind man, I think, in his own way, but he was often away on business, and when he was home, he seemed to defer to Mom's judgment on most household and child-rearing matters. He'd offer a quiet word of encouragement to me now and then, a pat on the back, but he never challenged the prevailing narrative that Chloe was the star and I was, well, just Nicole. Perhaps he saw it, perhaps he didn't, or perhaps he just didn't know how to intervene without causing more friction. I used to wish he'd speak up, champion me just once, but that wish faded with time, replaced by a quiet resignation. The only real sanctuary I had in those early years was my grandma Eleanor, my mother's mother. Grandma Eleanor was a force of nature, a woman widowed young who had carved out a life for herself with grit and a wry sense of humor. She lived in a small, cluttered cottage about an hour's drive away, filled with the scent of old books, lavender, and cinnamon. Her garden was a chaotic explosion of color and life, much like her personality. She saw me. She truly saw me. When I'd visit, she wouldn't just glance at my drawings, she'd study them. "Nicole," she'd say, her voice raspy from a lifetime of unfiltered cigarettes and strong opinions, "this shading here, under the willow tree, it's got a real mood to it. You've got an eye, child. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." She taught me how to bake lopsided cakes, how to identify birds by their song, and how to play a mean game of gin rummy. More importantly, she taught me that my thoughts mattered, that my quiet nature wasn't a flaw but a strength. "Still waters run deep, Nikki," she'd often say, ruffling my hair. "Don't you forget it." Those weekends with Grandma Eleanor were like breaths of fresh air, fortifying me for the return to the carefully curated atmosphere of my own home. Mom always seemed faintly irritated when I came back from Grandma's, as if I'd been somehow contaminated by her mother's bohemian, unpretentious ways. "Did Mother fill your head with nonsense again?" she'd ask, a tight little smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. As Chloe and I grew older, the favoritism became more pronounced, especially when it came to opportunities and resources. When Chloe wanted ballet lessons, piano lessons, writing lessons, the best were sourced, the fees paid without a murmur. When I expressed an interest in an advanced art class or a creative writing workshop, Mom would sigh. "Oh, Nicole, are you sure? It's quite expensive and you have your studies. Besides, Chloe really needs that new tennis racket." The implication was always clear. Chloe's wants were needs, my interests were frivolous extras. I learned to stop asking. I found solace in the library, devouring books, teaching myself to draw better from old art manuals. I became self-sufficient in my pursuits, driven by an internal engine that had little to do with external validation, mainly because there was so little of it offered at home. I did well in school, not spectacularly, but consistently. I was a solid B+, A- student. Chloe, on the other hand, scraped by with C's and D's, but her charm always seemed to smooth things over with teachers, and Mom would always find a way to frame it positively. "She's just not challenged enough by the curriculum," Mom would declare. "She's a people person, not a test taker." The excuses were endless, the goalposts ever shifting to accommodate Chloe's narrative. This pattern continued right through our teenage years and into early adulthood. Chloe went off to a flashy, expensive university to study marketing, a course Mom insisted was perfect for her outgoing personality. I chose a local college, more affordable, and studied graphic design. A field I was genuinely passionate about, even if Mom referred to it as "that little computer thing you do." My tuition was paid, but there were always comments about the cost, subtle reminders of the burden, while Chloe's significantly higher expenses were never mentioned in such a tone. I worked part-time jobs throughout college to cover my own expenses, to have a little independence, a little breathing room. Chloe always seemed to have a limitless allowance from Mom and Dad. The first real, overt crack in my carefully constructed emotional wall, the event that truly set the stage for later conflicts, happened when Grandma Eleanor passed away. I was 27, just starting to make my way as a freelance graphic designer. Grandma had been ill for a while, a slow decline that was heartbreaking to watch. I visited her as often as I could, holding her frail hand, listening to her stories, trying to soak up every last bit of her wisdom and unconditional love. Mom visited too, of course, but her visits always felt performative, duty-bound. Chloe rarely made an appearance, always citing a busy social life or university commitments. "Grandma understands," she'd say breezily, and Mom would nod in agreement. "Of course she does, darling, you've got so much on your plate." Grandma Eleanor's funeral was a somber affair. I was numb with grief. She had been my anchor, my quiet champion. Afterwards, there was the inevitable reading of the will. We gathered at the solicitor's office. Mom, Dad, Chloe, and I. I wasn't expecting anything, truly. Grandma didn't have much in the way of material wealth, or so I thought. Her cottage was rented, her pension modest. Her true riches were her spirit, her stories, her love, and those couldn't be itemized in a legal document. Mr. Abernathy, the solicitor, a kind, elderly man who had known Grandma for years, cleared his throat. He read through a few small bequests, some books to a local library, a donation to an animal shelter. Then he came to the main part. "To my daughter, Patricia Cooper," he read, "I leave the sum of £5,000 with my love and hopes that she finds some joy with it." Mom nodded, a polite, slightly strained expression on her face. £5,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something. "To my granddaughter, Chloe Cooper," Mr. Abernathy continued, "I also leave the sum of £5,000, hoping she uses it wisely for her future." Chloe, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up with mild interest, a small smile playing on her lips. "Oh, sweet," she murmured. Then, Mr. Abernathy adjusted his glasses and looked directly at me. "And to my granddaughter, Nicole Cooper, who shared my love for stories, for quiet corners, and for the beauty in things often overlooked, I leave the contents of the old cedar chest in my bedroom. Along with all my personal papers and journals, I also leave her the residue of my estate." "A cedar chest? And the residue?" I was confused. I remembered the chest. It was an old dark wood thing, quite plain, that sat at the foot of Grandma's bed. I'd never seen her open it. I assumed it held old blankets or linens, personal papers and journals. That part resonated. I knew Grandma wrote, though she rarely shared it. The residue of the estate. What did that even mean, after the specific sums were given out? Mom was the first to react. "A cedar chest," she said, her voice laced with a mixture of pity and perhaps a touch of disdain. "Well, Nicole, that's quaint. I suppose it's the thought that counts. Heaven knows what old moth-eaten things are in there. You'll probably just have to throw most of it out." She didn't even acknowledge the residue part, probably assuming, as I did, that it would amount to very little, if anything. Chloe just shrugged, already back to her phone, her £5,000 mentally spent, no doubt. My initial emotional impact was a strange cocktail. Overwhelming grief for Grandma was, of course, paramount, but underneath it, there was a flicker of something else. A poignant warmth that Grandma had thought to leave me something so personal, so specific, even if it seemed insignificant to others. The journals especially, those felt like a true gift, a continuation of our connection. The cedar chest, well, Mom was probably right. It was likely full of sentimental trinkets, things valuable only to Grandma. The residue was a mystery, but I didn't dwell on it. My heart ached too much for Grandma to process much else. In the days that followed, Mom's dismissal of my inheritance was a recurring theme. "Honestly, Nicole, when are you going to go and clear out that old chest? It's probably just taking up space. Don't feel you have to keep any of it, dear." Your grandmother, bless her, was a bit of a hoarder with certain things. Her tone was that familiar one, the one that implied I was being overly sentimental or impractical. There was no curiosity about what Grandma might have wanted me to have, only an assumption of its worthlessness. She was far more interested in discussing what Chloe would do with her lovely little windfall, maybe a new car, or a fabulous holiday. "Chloe deserves a treat," Mom said over dinner one night, a few weeks after the funeral. "She's been working so hard at university." I bit back the retort that Chloe's definition of hard work seemed to involve more partying than studying, according to her own social media posts. I just nodded, stirring my food. My inheritance, the cedar chest, sat in the corner of my small apartment, unopened. I wasn't ready. It felt too final. And Mom's constant belittling of it didn't exactly inspire me to rush. What if it was just old junk? What if it confirmed Mom's low estimation of anything Grandma valued and by extension anything I valued? The thought was a heavy weight, the injustice of it all, even in death, Grandma's thoughtfulness being dismissed, Chloe's predictable gift being lauded. It settled deep in my bones, a familiar ache. But this time, mixed with the ache was a tiny, stubborn spark. Grandma left it to me, for a reason. It took me nearly a month after the funeral to finally approach the cedar chest. The grief was still raw, a constant companion, but a new feeling was starting to emerge alongside it, a quiet determination. Grandma Eleanor had left me something specific, something she clearly felt was important for me to have. Her words in the will, "Who shared my love for stories, for quiet corners, and for the beauty in things often overlooked," echoed in my mind. This wasn't just an old box, it was a message, a legacy of a different kind. I made a silent vow to myself. There in my little living room, the city sounds a muted backdrop. I would honor her memory, and I would explore what she left me with an open heart, regardless of its material value. And I would do it for myself, not for anyone else's approval or understanding. The key was small and old-fashioned, taped to the underside of the chest's lid in an envelope with my name on it, written in Grandma's familiar, spidery handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I turned it in the lock. The lid creaked open, releasing a faint scent of cedar and something else, something indefinably old and precious. It wasn't full of moth-eaten blankets as Mom had predicted. Instead, it was neatly packed with smaller boxes, velvet pouches, and carefully wrapped parcels. And on top, a stack of leather-bound journals, her journals. My breath caught in my throat. This, I knew, was the real treasure, at least in one sense. Over the next few weeks, I slowly, reverently, went through the contents. The journals were a revelation. Grandma Eleanor, the woman I thought I knew so well, had lived an even richer, more complex life than I'd imagined. She wrote of her joys, her sorrows, her struggles as a young widow, her fierce independence, her observations of the world, her love for nature, and her unwavering belief in the power of kindness and quiet strength. There were even passages about me, about her hopes for my future, her belief in my artistic talent, her gentle frustrations with how she felt my mother sometimes overlooked me. Reading those words was like having her in the room with me, her voice a comforting murmur. It was profoundly healing. Then there were the other items. Tucked into velvet bags were pieces of antique jewelry, a pearl necklace that glowed with an inner luminescence, a set of delicate silver filigree earrings, a heavy gold locket with a miniature portrait I didn't recognize. There were also several small, intricately carved ivory figurines, and a collection of first-edition poetry books by authors I knew she loved. Each item felt imbued with her spirit. Mom would have called it old clutter. I saw it as a collection of beautiful, personal things, chosen with care and kept with love. One evening, about 2 months after Grandma's passing, Mr. Abernathy, the solicitor, called me. "Miss Cooper, Nicole, I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice kind. "I'm just finalizing the estate accounts for your grandmother, Eleanor. There's the matter of the residue. It's not a substantial amount, but it's cleared all debts and taxes, and I have a check here for you." I had almost forgotten about the residue. "Oh, right," I said. "How much is it, Mr. Abernathy? I was expecting maybe a few £100s, if that." "After all disbursements, including the sums to your mother and sister, the residue amounts to £27,452, he stated calmly. I nearly dropped the phone. 27,000, I stammered. "Are you sure?" "Quite sure, my dear," he chuckled. Eleanor was a surprisingly astute woman with her savings over the years. She lived simply, but she was careful. "It seems she wanted you to have a bit of a foundation." "A foundation? £27,000. It wasn't a king's ransom, but for me, a freelance graphic designer still finding her feet, struggling to make ends meet some months, it was a staggering sum. It was security. It was opportunity. It was a gift I hadn't dared to imagine. This, combined with the personal treasures in the chest, felt like Grandma was giving me a profound vote of confidence from beyond the grave. My life, up to that point, had been a series of quiet struggles. Financially, I was always just getting by. My apartment was small, my furniture second-hand, my diet often reliant on pasta and hope. I'd pour hours into my design work, often for clients who paid late or quibbled over every penny. There were times I'd lie awake at night, a knot of anxiety in my stomach, wondering how I'd make rent the next month. The emotional toll of my family dynamic was a constant, low-grade hum of stress. The feeling of being perpetually undervalued, of having to fight twice as hard for half the recognition Chloe received effortlessly, was exhausting. This inheritance, both the sentimental and the financial, felt like a lifeline. It wasn't just about the money, though that was undeniably a huge relief. It was the validation. Grandma believed in me. She saw my potential, my struggles, and she'd done what she could to give me a leg up, a chance to breathe, to build something for myself. Around this time, my friend Sarah became an even more crucial part of my support system. Sarah and I had met in college, bonding over a shared love of bad puns and good coffee. She was pragmatic, funny, and fiercely loyal. She knew all about my family situation, often being the one I'd vent to after a particularly trying phone call with Mom. When I told her about the inheritance, the journals, the jewelry, and then the unexpected sum of money, she was over the moon for me. "Nikki, this is amazing," she'd exclaimed, giving me a huge hug. "Your grandma Eleanor was a legend, see? She knew you were the one who'd appreciate it all, not just the cash." Sarah helped me think practically. She encouraged me to get the jewelry appraised, just for insurance purposes. "Not that you'd ever sell it," she added quickly, "but it's good to know." She also helped me research financial advisors, so I could make the monetary part of the inheritance work for me sensibly. The contrast with my family's reaction, or lack thereof, was stark. When I eventually, tentatively, mentioned to Mom that the residue of Grandma's estate had been more than expected, I didn't specify the amount initially. Her response was lukewarm. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she'd said, her voice distracted. She was in the middle of planning a weekend spa trip for Chloe, whose latest stressful university exams were approaching. "Don't go spending it all at once on your art supplies. There was that familiar, subtle dig again, the implication that anything I valued was frivolous. The jewelry and other items from the chest, when I'd briefly described them, were dismissed as Grandma's old bits and bobs. There was no curiosity, no acknowledgement of their sentimental or potential historical value. Chloe, when she heard I'd received an additional sum, simply said, "Oh, cool, lucky you." Then she immediately launched into a story about a new handbag she wanted. Their casual indifference to what felt like a life-altering event for me was just another layer of the same old story, but this time it didn't sting quite as much. I had Grandma's words in the journals, her tangible gifts, and Sarah's unwavering support. I was starting to build my own little fortress of self-worth, brick by painstaking brick. One of the antique pieces from the cedar chest particularly captivated me. It was a rather large, somewhat tarnished silver brooch, set with what I assumed were colored glass stones, intricately shaped like a spray of forget-me-nots. It wasn't as obviously valuable looking as the pearls or the gold locket. Mom, had she seen it, would have definitely categorized it as junk. But Grandma had written about it in one of her journals. "Papa gave this to Mama on their first anniversary," she'd penned. She wore it every Sunday. She said it reminded her that true beauty often lies hidden, waiting for a discerning eye. Papa was my great-grandfather. This brooch was a piece of family history, passed down. On Sarah's urging, and out of my own growing curiosity, I took a few pieces of the jewelry, including the forget-me-not brooch, to a reputable antique appraiser downtown. I mostly did it for the insurance valuation, as Sarah suggested. I wasn't expecting any earth-shattering revelations. I sat nervously in Mr. Profout Albright's dusty, book-lined office while he examined the items with a loupe, his expression unreadable. He dealt with the pearls and the locket first, confirming they were indeed valuable, fine-quality pieces. "Your grandmother had excellent taste, young lady," he murmured, making notes. Then he picked up the forget-me-not brooch. He spent a long time with it, turning it over and over, peering at the settings, the clasp, the faint maker's mark on the back. Finally, he looked up at me over the rim of his spectacles, a strange gleam in his eye. "Miss Cooper," he said slowly, this is rather special. The stones are not glass. They are sapphires and small diamonds, of a very fine cut and color for their period. And this maker's mark, this piece is by a rather renowned Victorian artisan. It's quite rare. Considerably valuable, in fact." I stared at him, speechless. Valuable? How valuable? He named a figure that made my jaw drop. It was more than the entire cash residue of the estate, considerably more. This old bit of junk, as Mom would undoubtedly have called it, was a significant antique. Suddenly, Grandma's words about beauty often lies hidden, waiting for a discerning eye took on a whole new meaning. She hadn't just left me trinkets, she'd left me a legacy of discernment, of appreciating true worth beyond the superficial, and, as it turned out, something of considerable monetary value too. The knowledge of the brooch's true worth and the respectable value of the other pieces didn't change my intention to keep them. They were Grandma's, they were history. But it did something to me internally. It was like another layer of validation, not from a person, but from the objects themselves, affirming Grandma's quiet wisdom and my own growing sense of worth. I decided not to mention this specific valuation to my family. What was the point? They hadn't been interested before, they wouldn't understand now. This was my secret, my quiet strength, a gift from Grandma that transcended its monetary value. With the £27,000, I made some sensible decisions. I paid off the small student loan that still hung over my head. I invested a good portion of it with the financial advisor Sarah had recommended. And I allowed myself a small indulgence, a new, high-quality laptop and professional design software that I'd been dreaming of for years but could never afford. It was an investment in my freelance business, in my future. Suddenly, work felt less like a desperate scramble and more like a chosen path. My confidence grew. My designs became bolder, more innovative. I started attracting better clients, bigger projects. Over the next year or so, I quietly, steadily built my life. I was still Nicole, the quiet observer, but something inside me had shifted. I was more centered, more self-assured. I still spoke to my family regularly, of course. The calls with Mom were the same. full of news about Chloe's new job, which she'd landed through a family friend Mom had networked with, Chloe's new apartment, for which Mom and Dad were paying a significant portion of the rent, Chloe's exciting social life, my own small successes, a prestigious design award I won, a major client I landed, were met with the usual, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Did Chloe tell you about her promotion?" It used to hurt, that casual dismissal. Now it was more like a dull ache, a reminder of a dynamic I couldn't change, but one that no longer defined me. I had Grandma's journals to read when I felt low. I had Sarah's steadfast friendship. And I had the quiet satisfaction of my own achievements, my growing independence, and the secret knowledge of the true legacy Grandma Eleanor had left me, nestled in that old cedar chest. The forget-me-not brooch often sat on my desk as I worked, a silent reminder. There was one small, almost imperceptible shift in the family dynamics. My father, on his increasingly rare visits home from his overseas assignments, started to look at me differently. There was a new respect in his eyes, a dawning awareness perhaps. He'd ask me more questions about my work, listen intently to my answers. Once, he even said, "You know, Nicole, your grandmother would be incredibly proud of you. You've got her quiet strength." It was a small comment, almost throwaway, but it meant the world to me. It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged Grandma's particular fondness for me, or my resemblance to her in that way. Mom, of course, had just sniffed and changed the subject. Then came the news of Mom's upcoming 60th birthday. This wasn't just any birthday, this was a milestone, and Mom was planning a grand celebration. A lavish dinner party at a fancy restaurant, followed by a weekend getaway for her and Dad and, of course, Chloe. The preparations were discussed in endless detail during our phone calls. The guest list, the menu, the decorations, Chloe's crucial role in organizing the surprise elements. My name never came up in the context of an invitation. I knew, without it being said, that I wasn't really expected to be a central part of it. I was an optional extra, at best. One afternoon, about a month before the party, Mom called. Her voice was brittle. "Nicole," she began without preamble, "about my birthday party. I've been thinking. It's going to be a very crowded affair, you know, lots of old friends I haven't seen in ages. And Chloe has invited some of her work colleagues. It's just that seating is very tight at Le Jardin, and honestly, darling, I'm not sure it's really your kind of thing." All that noise and fuss. I listened, a cold knot forming in my stomach. This was it, the explicit disinvitation. "So, you're saying you don't want me to come?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Well, not don't want you to come, exactly," she said, her tone becoming slightly flustered, as if my directness had caught her off guard. "It's just, perhaps it would be better if we had a quiet little dinner, just you and me, some other time, when things aren't so hectic. You understand, don't you, dear? It's just so much to manage." "I understand perfectly, Mom," I said, the coldness spreading through me. "You don't want me there." The old Nicole would have been devastated, would have pleaded, or cried. The new Nicole felt a surge of icy calm. This was just another data point in a lifetime of them. Hurtful, yes. Surprising? Not really. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Nicole," she snapped, her brief attempt at gentleness vanishing. "It's a practical decision, Chloe agrees. She said you'd probably be much happier having a quiet night in anyway." Chloe agreed. Of course, she did. "Right," I said. "Well, thanks for letting me know. I hope you have a wonderful birthday, Mom." I kept my voice even, betraying none of the turmoil inside. I ended the call, feeling a profound sense of weariness but also, strangely, a sense of liberation. The pretense was over. I was officially out. I told Sarah about it later that day. She was incandescent with rage on my behalf. "That woman, that absolute, and Chloe, they are unbelievable, Nikki. How dare they? After everything." "It's okay, Sarah," I said, trying to soothe her, and perhaps myself. Honestly, a part of me is relieved. It would have been an ordeal, sitting there, being ignored, watching Chloe bask in the limelight. "But it's the principle of it," Sarah fumed. "Your own mother, her 60th. "I know," I sighed. "But what can I do? I can't force them to want me there." I decided I would send a polite, somewhat distant birthday card and a generic gift certificate. I would take the high road. Internally though, a little piece of my heart, the piece that still yearned for maternal acceptance, felt bruised and battered. But the rest of me, the part fortified by Grandma's love and my own hard-won independence, just shrugged and got back to work. I had a life to live, a business to run. I didn't need their party. A few days before the scheduled birthday bash, something unexpected happened. My Aunt Carol, Mom's younger sister, called me. Aunt Carol was a kind woman, though somewhat easily influenced by Mom. She lived in another city and we didn't see her often. "Nicole dear, how are you?" she asked, her voice a little hesitant. "I was just chatting with Patricia, and she happened to mention something about your Grandma Eleanor's old jewelry. She said you'd inherited some interesting pieces?" I was surprised. Mom had never shown any interest. "Yes, Aunt Carol," I said cautiously. "Grandma left me her cedar chest. There were some lovely things in it." Patricia seemed to think some of it might be quite valuable. Aunt Carol pressed, a note of curiosity in her voice. "She mentioned you'd had it appraised, something about a brooch?" My internal alarm bells went off. How did Mom know I'd had it appraised? I hadn't told her, and why the sudden interest? Then I remembered. Months ago, when Mr. Brood and Med Albright had given me the valuation for insurance, his assistant had, as a courtesy, sent a summary list to the solicitor's office. Mr. Abernathy, who was still formally the executor of the will, even though the estate was mostly settled, Mr. Abernathy, in one of his periodic updates to Mom about the final tiny details of winding up the estate, utility bill refunds, that sort of thing, must have innocently mentioned the insurance valuation summary for the personal effects left to me. He wouldn't have known the implications. He was just being thorough. Mom must have just seen the figures recently or had them brought to her attention somehow. "Yes," I confirmed, keeping my voice level. "Some of it is quite old and has some historical value. The forget-me-not brooch in particular is a Victorian piece by a known artisan. It's rather special." I didn't mention the monetary figure. "Oh my," Aunt Carol exclaimed. Patricia didn't mention specifics, just that it was significant. She seemed quite flustered by it, actually. She said she had no idea Eleanor owned anything like that. She thought it was all just costume stuff. Flustered, that was an interesting choice of words. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. What was Mom up to? I thanked Aunt Carol for the call and hung up, feeling a sense of foreboding. The timing was too coincidental. Mom finds out I've inherited something unexpectedly valuable, right before her big party, the one I'm explicitly uninvited to. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you suspect something was about to change? The very next day, my phone rang. Caller ID, Mom. I braced myself. Her voice, when I answered, was like honey mixed with treacle, overly sweet, a little sticky. "Nicole, darling, I was just thinking about you. How are you, my sweet girl?" This was so out of character, it was almost comical. "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, my tone guarded. "What's up?" "Oh, nothing, she trilled. "Just thinking about my party on Saturday. And you know, darling, I was re-looking at the seating plan for Le Jardin, and Chloe and I managed to juggle a few things around, and we've managed to find a spot for you after all. Isn't that wonderful? We'd absolutely love for you to be there. It wouldn't be the same without you, precious." Precious? My jaw tightened. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Just days ago, I was an inconvenience, someone who wouldn't enjoy the fuss. Now, suddenly, I was precious and the party wouldn't be the same without me. The reason was so blindingly obvious it was insulting. She knew. She knew about the brooch, or at least suspected its significant value. My inheritance, the one she'd dismissed as old junk, had suddenly made me interesting, desirable. My mind raced. What should I do? Part of me wanted to tell her exactly what I thought of her sudden change of heart, to call out her blatant materialism and hang up. Another part, the weary, cynical part, just wanted to ignore it all. But then, a third voice emerged, a quieter, stronger voice, the voice that had been nurtured by Grandma Eleanor's wisdom and my own journey to self-worth. This wasn't just about Mom's hypocrisy anymore. This was an opportunity. Not to win her approval, I was long past truly craving that, but to make a statement, to stand in my own truth, on my own terms. "Oh, Mom," I said, my voice carefully neutral, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. "That's quite a surprise. After our last conversation, I'd made other plans." This was a small lie. My only plan was a quiet evening with Sarah and a good movie, but she didn't need to know that. Other plans? Her voice sharpened for a split second before the sweetness oozed back in. Oh darling, surely you can change them, it's my 60th. It's ever so important to me that you're there. Please, Nicole. For me? The manipulative guilt trip, a classic. I paused, letting the silence stretch, let her sweat a little. Then, I said, "All right, Mom. Since it's so important to you, I'll see if I can rearrange things. What time should I be there?" Relief flooded her voice. "Oh, wonderful, darling. 7:30 at Le Jardin, and wear something nice, won't you?" It's a dressy affair. The implication, as always, that my usual attire wasn't up to her standards. "I'll be there," I said, and ended the call. I sat there for a long moment, phone in my hand, a strange mixture of anger, amusement, and steely resolve coursing through me. Game on, mother. You want me there because you think I have something you value? Fine, I'll come. But I'll come as myself, Nicole Cooper, the woman your mother believed in, not the daughter you molded into an afterthought, and I'll wear exactly what I want. Including Grandma's forget-me-not brooch. The pivotal event, Mom's 60th birthday party at the very chic, very expensive Le Jardin restaurant, arrived on a crisp Saturday evening. I spent the afternoon getting ready, not with nervous excitement, but with a calm, deliberate sense of purpose. I chose a simple, elegant dark blue dress, one I'd bought with my own earnings after landing a particularly good freelance contract. It was understated but made me feel confident. And then, the final touch. Grandma Eleanor's forget-me-not brooch pinned carefully to the shoulder. It lay against the dark fabric, its sapphires and diamonds catching the light, no longer looking like tarnished glass but like the quiet statement of enduring value it truly was. I looked at my reflection. This wasn't about revenge, it was about self-respect, it was about honoring Grandma. When I arrived at Le Jardin, the party was already in full swing. The private dining room was opulent, filled with flowers, soft lighting, and the murmur of conversations from people dressed in their finest. Mom, resplendent in a sequined gown, was holding court near the entrance, greeting guests with theatrical air kisses. Chloe, looking like a fashion magazine cover, was flitting around, playing the perfect hostess daughter. Mom spotted me as I walked in. Her eyes, for a fraction of a second, flickered down to the brooch on my dress before meeting mine. A small, almost imperceptible tightening around her lips, then replaced by a wide, dazzling smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nicole, darling, you made it. We were so worried you might be late." She enveloped me in a brief, perfumed hug, her hand patting my arm a little too enthusiastically. "You look lovely, dear." Her gaze snagged on the brooch again. "What an interesting pin." "It was Grandma Eleanor's," I said clearly, my voice steady. "She left it to me." Several nearby guests, friends of Mom's, overheard. There was a polite murmur of interest. "Oh yes, Eleanor's old things," Mom said, a little too brightly, a little too dismissively, but her eyes kept darting back to it. She clearly hadn't expected me to wear it so prominently, so confidently. She probably hoped I'd keep it tucked away, or that it wouldn't look like much. But under the restaurant's sophisticated lighting, the antique craftsmanship and the quality of the stones were undeniable, even to an untrained eye. It didn't scream expensive in a modern, flashy way. It whispered heritage and quality. Chloe drifted over, a champagne flute in her hand. "Nikki, you came. Mom was so hoping you would." Her smile was wide, but her eyes were assessing me, lingering on the brooch too. The family radar for anything potentially valuable was clearly well honed. The dinner was an elaborate affair, course after course of exquisitely presented food. I was seated at a table slightly off to the side, with some distant cousins and a few of Mom's less important friends. Standard procedure. I didn't mind. I made polite conversation, observed the room, and felt a strange sense of detachment. I was there, but not truly part of it, and that was okay. During a lull between the main course and dessert, Mom tapped her glass for attention. She made a speech, thanking everyone for coming, talking about how blessed she was with her wonderful family. She gushed about Dad and then, at length, about Chloe. My beautiful, talented Chloe, who is my rock, my sunshine, who has organized so much of this wonderful evening. I don't know what I'd do without her. Chloe preened, blowing kisses. My name, of course, wasn't mentioned. I hadn't expected it to be. Then Aunt Carol, who was seated at Mom's table, leaned over and said something to her, gesturing subtly towards me and the brooch. I couldn't hear what she said, but Mom's head snapped up. Her eyes locked onto the brooch again, this time with a focused intensity. A look passed between her and Aunt Carol, and then Mom's expression changed. The polite hostess mask slipped, replaced by something avaricious and calculating. This was the moment the public, or at least semi-public, exposure of the truth really began, not through my words but through her reaction. After the speeches, as people started to mingle more freely, Mom made a beeline for me. She pulled me aside, her grip on my arm surprisingly firm. "Nicole," she said, her voice low and urgent, the saccharine sweetness gone, replaced by a sharp, proprietary tone. "That brooch. Aunt Carol was just telling me she heard from someone who knows antiques that Victorian pieces like that can be extraordinarily valuable. Is that true, Nicole? Did you know?" This was it, my moment of assertion. I looked her straight in the eye. My heart was pounding, but my voice, when I spoke, was calm and clear. "Yes, Mom, it's true. It's a signed piece by a notable jeweler. It's quite rare. Grandma Eleanor had excellent taste, and she knew its worth." Her eyes widened, a flicker of something, shock, greed, regret, passing through them. And you didn't think to mention this? To your own mother?" Her voice was accusatory. "Eleanor left you something like that and kept it a secret from me all these years?" "Grandma left it to me, Mom," I repeated quietly but firmly. "She left it to the granddaughter who loved her stories and appreciated the beauty in things often overlooked. She knew I would cherish it for what it is, not just for what it's worth in money." I paused, then added, letting the words sink in, "She also knew I wouldn't try to pressure someone into selling it or feel entitled to it just because it turned out to be valuable." The color drained from Mom's face. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. Around us, the party chatter seemed to fade. A few people nearby had clearly overheard the last part of our exchange. They were looking at Mom with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect family, the perfect hostess, was cracking. But it's family," she finally spluttered, her voice rising slightly. "Something that valuable, it should be shared, or at least I should have been consulted. I'm her daughter." "It is family, Mom," I said, my gaze unwavering. "It's Grandma's legacy to me, and I am honoring her wishes by keeping it and treasuring it." I gently removed her hand from my arm. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe they're about to serve dessert. It's your birthday, after all. You should enjoy it." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, speechless and visibly shaken. The shock on her face was profound. It wasn't just about the brooch's value anymore. It was about her loss of control, her misjudgment, and the public nature of this quiet confrontation. She had expected me to be grateful for the last-minute invitation, perhaps to be flattered by her sudden interest. She had expected to be able to manipulate the situation to her advantage, as she always had. She had not expected me to stand up to her, calmly and unequivocally, in front of her friends and family. The immediate aftermath was interesting. My vindication wasn't a loud, triumphant shout. It was a quiet, internal hum of self-respect. I had spoken my truth. I had honored Grandma. I had set a boundary. And for the first time, Mom had no comeback. She looked, quite frankly, stunned into silence. Several guests who had witnessed the exchange gave me small, almost imperceptible nods of understanding, even support. Aunt Carol looked profoundly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with both me and Mom. Mom spent the rest of the evening looking rather pale and distracted. Her usual effusive charm was noticeably diminished. She kept shooting furtive, resentful glances in my direction. Chloe, who had clearly been filled in by Mom, looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and outright hostility. If looks could kill, I'd have been incinerated by her glare. But it didn't matter. Their opinions no longer held the power to wound me as they once did. The power dynamic had subtly but irrevocably shifted. I had not sought this confrontation, but I hadn't shied away from it when it came, and in that I found a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. Sarah, whom I'd texted a brief update, replied almost immediately, "You go, girl. Grandma Eleanor is cheering you on from somewhere awesome." And I knew she was right. The fallout for Mom was more social than anything else. Whispers undoubtedly circulated. Her blatant materialism and manipulative behavior had been laid bare for at least a few key observers to see. Her authority, her carefully curated image as the benevolent matriarch, had taken a significant hit. She had tried to use my inheritance as a pawn, and it had backfired spectacularly. Her loss of face, especially among her social circle who valued appearances so highly, must have been galling. For me, the support system rallied. Sarah was, of course, my biggest cheerleader. But even my father, when he called me a few days later, Mom was apparently indisposed and too upset to speak to me, sounded different. "Nicole," he said, his voice unusually subdued. "Your mother is taking this rather hard. About the brooch." "I'm sure she is, Dad," I replied calmly. There was a pause. Then he said almost hesitantly, "You know, your grandmother was a very wise woman. She always knew who people really were. She would be proud of how you handled yourself." Coming from him, that was monumental. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a validation that meant more than he probably realized. It hinted that perhaps, just perhaps, he'd seen the dynamic all along but hadn't known how to address it. In the weeks that followed, there were a few tentative, awkward attempts at something from Mom. Not quite reconciliation, more like damage control mixed with a bizarre sense of entitlement. One afternoon she called and, after a few minutes of strained small talk, said, "Nicole, darling, about that brooch, perhaps you'd consider letting me wear it sometime? To a special occasion? It would mean so much to me, to wear something of Mother's." The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. "No, Mom," I said politely but firmly. "I won't be lending it out. It's very precious to me, as Grandma intended." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Well, I never. Such selfishness. After all I've done for you." The victim card, another classic. "Mom," I said, my patience wearing thin, "Grandma left it to me. That's the end of the discussion about the brooch. If you'd like to talk about something else, I'm happy to. Otherwise, I have to go." She huffed and puffed a bit more, but the fight seemed to go out of her. The terms of our interactions were now being dictated by me. It was a new and frankly empowering experience. Our relationship, if it was to continue, would be on a very different footing. The old patterns of guilt, dismissal, and manipulation were no longer effective. My new life, post-brooch revelation, wasn't dramatically different on the surface but profoundly changed underneath. I continued to build my graphic design business, which flourished. The confidence I'd gained seemed to infuse my work, attracting more exciting and lucrative projects. I even started a small online store selling prints of my personal artwork, something I'd never had the courage to do before. It wasn't a massive commercial success, but it was mine, and it brought me joy. I lived my life on my own terms, free from the suffocating weight of seeking approval that was never going to come. The residue from Grandma's estate, combined with my increased earnings, allowed me to save enough for a down payment on a small, charming apartment in a neighborhood I loved. One with lots of trees and quiet cafes. Very much a Nicole kind of place. It was my sanctuary, filled with my books, my art, and peace. Grandma's cedar chest had pride of place in my bedroom, and the forget-me-not brooch, safely stored but often taken out and admired, remained a potent symbol of her love and my own resilience. The long-term status of my relationship with Mom remained complicated. It never went back to how it was, thankfully. The power had shifted. She learned, slowly and grudgingly, that I would not be manipulated or dismissed. Our conversations became more superficial, more cautious. Sometimes I'd see a flicker of her old self, the critical, demanding mother, but now I had the strength to shut it down, to end the call, to protect my peace. Did she ever truly regret her behavior? I doubt it. I think she regretted losing control, regretted underestimating me, and perhaps regretted missing out on what she perceived as a share of valuable assets. But true remorse, true understanding of the hurt she'd caused over the years, that seemed beyond her. Chloe remained firmly in Mom's camp, seeing me as ungrateful and difficult. Our relationship, already strained, became virtually non-existent, limited to curt nods at the rare, unavoidable family gatherings Dad sometimes orchestrated. I mourned the sister I never really had, but I accepted it. Some bonds, I learned, are not meant to be, no matter how much you might wish otherwise. My father, however, continued to surprise me. Our relationship deepened. He started calling me independently of Mom, asking for my opinions, sharing snippets of his own life. It was as if Grandma's passing and the subsequent events had finally allowed him to see me clearly, to step out from under Mom's dominant influence, at least in his interactions with me. He even, on one occasion, apologized. I should have stood up for you more when you were younger, Nicole. I see that now. Your mother, she can be a strong personality. It wasn't a full absolution, but it was an acknowledgement, and it healed something deep inside me. Looking back on that whole period, from Grandma's passing to that fateful birthday party and beyond, the lessons learned are crystal clear. The first, and perhaps most important, is that your self-worth cannot be tied to the approval of others, especially those who are determined to withhold it. For years, I subconsciously craved Mom's validation, bending myself into shapes I thought might please her, only to be met with indifference or criticism. It was only when I stopped seeking it, when I started to build my own sense of value based on Grandma's unwavering belief and my own achievements, that I truly found peace. External validation is nice when it comes, but internal conviction is essential. Secondly, I learned that true family isn't always about blood. It's about love, respect, support, and acceptance. Grandma Eleanor was more of a mother to me in many ways than my own. Sarah was more of a sister than Chloe. These people, my chosen family, saw me, valued me, and cheered me on without reservation. They taught me that you can build your own support systems, your own tribe, even when your biological family falls short. And finally, I learned the incredible power of resilience and quiet strength. Being underestimated can be a gift, in a strange way. It allows you to grow in the shadows, to build your foundations without scrutiny, until you're ready to emerge, not with a roar, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their own worth. Grandma knew that. Her legacy wasn't just the journals, the jewelry, or the money, it was the lesson embodied in the forget-me, not brooch itself, that true beauty and value often lie hidden, waiting for a discerning eye, and that discerning eye must first be your own. So, what about you all? Have you ever had an experience where someone drastically changed their tune towards you once they perceived you had something they wanted? How did you handle it? Share your stories and experiences in the comments below. I genuinely love to read them. We can all learn from each other. And please, don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about navigating life's challenges and finding your own path to empowerment. Remember, your value is inherent. It's not dictated by anyone else's opinion or agenda. Believe in yourself, cherish those who truly see you, and never be afraid to set boundaries to protect your peace. Thanks for listening.